A barefoot kid walked into the richest part of Manhattan carrying a broken chess set. "I'll give you $100 million if you beat me," the billionaire laughed. He had no idea he was betting against the wrong person, and that he was about to lose everything. The chess pieces exploded across the sidewalk like shattered dreams. Ethan Brooks, 11 years old and barefoot, watched his grandfather's hand-carved king roll into a puddle of dirty water near the Washington Square Park fountain. The queen split in two against the concrete edge. Pawns scattered like fallen soldiers across the pavement that had seen 1,000 games, 1,000 stories, but none quite like what was about to unfold. "Move it, kid!" The shout came from a man in a suit that probably cost more than Ethan's family paid in rent for 6 months. "You're blocking the walkway!" The man's briefcase had knocked the board clean out of Ethan's hands as he'd rushed past without looking, without caring, without even slowing down to see what he'd destroyed. To him, Ethan was invisible. Just another poor kid cluttering up the nice part of the city. But Ethan couldn't move. His hands were still extended in the air, frozen in the exact position they'd been when holding his most precious possession. The chess set his grandfather had spent 3 months carving before he died, before everything fell apart, before Ethan learned that the world didn't care about barefoot kids with broken dreams. The knight, his favorite piece, the one Grandpa George had taken 5 days to perfect because knights are special, Ethan. They jump over obstacles just like you're going to jump over every obstacle life throws at you, now had its head completely severed from its body. Tears came before Ethan could stop them, not because of the physical impact, not because his knees were scraped from falling, but because this chess set was the last thing his grandfather had touched before the heart attack took him 8 months ago. The last tangible proof that George Brooks had existed, had mattered, had loved his grandson enough to spend his final weeks creating something beautiful from nothing. "Oh, sweetheart." A woman's voice cut through the noise of the park. Mrs. Washington, who sold newspapers from a cart near the fountain, was kneeling beside him despite her 70 years and arthritic knees. "Let me help you, baby." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Washington," Ethan whispered, wiping tears with the back of his hand and leaving dirt streaks across his cheeks. "I was studying a chess puzzle in my notebook and didn't see him coming. I should have moved faster." "You got nothing to apologize for." Mrs. Washington's voice was firm despite her trembling hands as she helped gather the pieces. "That man in his fancy suit didn't even look where he was going, didn't even stop to see who he hurt." Ethan picked up the broken knight and pressed it against his chest. The wood was warm from the afternoon sun, and he could feel every imperfection where Grandpa's hands had worked. He remembered sitting on this exact bench 3 years ago, watching the old man carve, listening to him explain that each piece had its own personality. "The knight's different from all the others, little man," Grandpa George had said with those bright eyes that always sparkled when he talked about chess. "It moves in ways they can't understand, jumps right over their heads. That's gonna be you someday, jumping over every obstacle they put in your way." But now the knight was broken, and Ethan didn't know how to jump over this. "Come on, help me up." Mrs. Washington was breathing heavily, the effort of kneeling taking its toll. Ethan supported her arm, feeling the fragile bones beneath her worn jacket. When they were both seated on the bench that had witnessed thousands of games, Mrs. Washington pulled out an old handkerchief and began cleaning the pieces tenderly. "You know what day it is?" she asked. Ethan shook his head, still staring at the broken knight. 3 years ago exactly, your grandpa sat on this very bench on his last afternoon and told me something I'll never forget." Mrs. Washington paused, her cloudy eyes looking into the past. He said, "Ernestine, my grandson's gonna be somebody. Don't know how or when, but he's got something special. Chess runs in his veins like it ran in mine. Take care of him when I'm gone." Ethan's tears fell onto the wooden knight, darkening the grain. "And I promised him I would," Mrs. Washington continued, "that I'd make sure you kept playing, that the gift God gave you wouldn't be wasted for lack of opportunity." "But what's the point, Mrs. Washington?" Ethan's voice cracked. "Look where we are. Look at how we live. My mom cleans toilets so we can eat. My dad can barely work because of his back. I play chess in a park because we don't have money for a real school. What does it matter if I'm good if nobody sees me?" Mrs. Washington took Ethan's face between her calloused hands. "Somebody's gonna see you, child. And when that day comes, you're gonna be ready. That's why you come here every day. That's why you study every game you can find. That's why you play against anyone who'll sit with you. Am I wrong? Ethan looked at his bare feet. The shoes his mother had bought with such sacrifice had fallen apart months ago, and there was no money for new ones. He'd learned to walk the hot city streets barefoot, developing thick calluses. At first he'd been ashamed. Now it was just his reality. "Mrs. Washington, I lied to Mom today," Ethan confessed. "Told her I had to study, but really I wanted to come play. I should have been helping her clean those office buildings." "And why'd you want to come play?" "Because," Ethan gripped the broken knight tighter. "Because when I move the pieces, when I see the board, when I think 3, 4, 5 moves ahead, I forget I'm hungry. I forget I don't have shoes. I forget I heard Mom crying again last night when she thought I was asleep." The confession poured out like a flood, words he'd been holding for so long. "I forget Dad's angry all the time because he can't provide for his family. I forget we live in one room where I hear everything through the curtain that separates my mattress from theirs. I forget I'm 11 and should be in school, but we had to choose between education and food, and here I am." Mrs. Washington closed her eyes, feeling the weight of every word. "Chess is the only thing I have that's mine," Ethan continued, his voice barely a whisper now. "It's the only thing I'm good at, where my clothes don't matter or my feet or my address. Only the moves matter, only thinking matters, and now even that's broken." The old woman let silence settle before speaking. "Ethan, look at me." The boy raised his dark eyes, bright with unshed tears. "Your grandpa taught me something about chess I never forgot. He said the most powerful piece on the board isn't the queen, even though she moves in every direction. It's not the rook, even though it's strong. It's the pawn." Ethan frowned. "But the pawn's the weakest piece. That's what everyone thinks." Mrs. Washington smiled. "But the pawn's the only piece that can transform. It can become anything if it reaches the other side of the board. Starts as the lowest value piece and ends up being whatever it needs to be to win the game." She picked up one of the pawns, one that had miraculously survived the fall undamaged. "You're like this pawn, Ethan. Started with no advantages, no money, no connections, no opportunities others have. But you got something all those kids in fancy chess schools don't have. You got hunger. You got determination. And you got a talent that can't be bought or taught. It's either born in you or it's not. But the board's broken." Ethan pointed to the damaged pieces. "The board can be fixed. Your spirit, if you let it break, can't." Mrs. Washington reached into her newspaper bag and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. "And besides, not everything's lost. Look what I got." She unwrapped it, revealing a small bottle of strong glue. "Bought this with what I made selling papers today. Figured you might need to repair a piece sooner or later. Didn't know it'd be today." Ethan took the glue with shaking hands. "Mrs. Washington, this must have cost exactly what it was worth paying," she interrupted. "Now let's fix that knight and all the other pieces. Then you're going to set up your board and wait for an opponent and play like your life depends on it." They spent the next half hour working in silence, carefully gluing each broken piece. The knight got its head back, though the glue line was visible. Some pawns recovered their broken corners. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional. "Like this knight, Mrs. Washington held the repaired piece up to the fading afternoon light. "We all got scars, but scars just prove we survived something that could have destroyed us." Ethan carefully arranged the board on the cardboard he always used. The board itself was old, squares hand-painted by his grandfather because they couldn't afford a real one. Some squares were worn, colors faded from sun and rain from so many afternoons in the park. "You think anyone will play today?" Ethan asked, looking at the nearly empty park. It was almost 6 p.m., the time when workers usually passed through on their way home. "There's always someone willing to face the Washington Square Park champion," Mrs. Washington winked, though most regretted after the first move. Ethan couldn't help a small smile. In the 3 years since Grandpa died, he'd played against hundreds of opponents in this park. Construction workers on lunch breaks, board office workers, college students who thought beating a kid would be easy. He'd only lost 3 times, all against much older players with years of experience. The park was his academy, his tournament, his world. What Ethan didn't know was that 2 blocks away, at that exact moment, a black Mercedes was navigating slowly through traffic, completely out of place in this part of the city. Inside the car, Alexander Hartwell reviewed the message on his phone for the 5th time. Washington Square Park, near the fountain. Look for the kid with the board. If you beat him at chess, you win. If you lose everything. Master Crawford. Alexander had read the message dozens of times since receiving it that morning. The challenge from Master Vincent Crawford had intrigued him immediately. $100 million in real estate on the line, all depending on a simple chess game against the city's best player. "You sure this is the right place, Catherine?" he asked his secretary, looking out the tinted window at the deteriorating streets. "Master Crawford was very specific, Mr. Hartwell," Catherine replied, checking her tablet. "Washington Square Park, near the fountain that doesn't work." Alexander frowned. He was one of the richest real estate developers in New York. His buildings transformed entire neighborhoods. His investments moved millions daily, and now he was being directed to a park in a neighborhood that probably hadn't seen investment in decades. "This has to be a joke," he muttered. "Crawford's playing with me." But the challenge had been clear. If Alexander could defeat the player Crawford had identified as the city's best, he'd win the rights to property valued at $100 million. Property Alexander had been trying to acquire for years for his most ambitious development. If he lost, well, Alexander didn't contemplate losing. He never did. "There's the park, sir," the driver indicated. The car stopped slowly. Alexander observed the scene through the polarized glass. A broken fountain filled with trash and dead leaves. Cracked concrete benches. Some old trees providing uneven shade. And there, by the third bench, a barefoot 11-year-old boy arranging chess pieces on a board that looked handmade. "That's him?" Alexander almost laughed. "The city's best player is a kid?" "Apparently." Catherine observed the scene with a neutral expression, though her eyes showed something like pity. Alexander stepped out of the car, followed by Catherine. His Italian designer shoes hit the broken pavement of the park. His $1,000 suit gleamed in the afternoon sun. His watch was worth more than everything within 3 blocks combined. Several people in the park turned to stare. It was impossible not to. He was like an alien landing in the middle of their daily reality. Ethan looked up from his board, and his eyes met Alexander's. For a second they just stared at each other. The barefoot boy in patched clothes and the impeccable millionaire. 2 completely different worlds sharing the same space. "Excuse me," Alexander approached, his voice carrying that tone he used when speaking to people he considered beneath him. "Do you play chess?" "Yes, sir," Ethan responded, his voice clear but cautious. "Are you any good?" Ethan hesitated. Grandpa had taught him to be humble, but also not to lie. "I'm pretty good, sir." Alexander let out a short laugh. "Pretty good? How modest." He turned to Catherine. "This is for real. Crawford wants me to play against this kid." "Apparently, Mr. Hartwell," Catherine repeated. Mrs. Washington, who'd been watching silently from her newspaper cart, approached slowly. She recognized Alexander immediately. His face appeared in the papers she sold almost weekly. News of his deals, his investments, his extravagant parties. "Mr. Hartwell," she greeted with courtesy but not servility. "What brings you to our humble neighborhood?" Alexander barely looked at her. "Business. I was told I'd find a good chess player here." "You found the best." Mrs. Washington put a protective hand on Ethan's shoulder. "My boy here hasn't lost a game in months." "Your boy?" Alexander looked at Ethan with new interest, but not the positive kind. It was the look he reserved for things he considered curiosities, not real threats. "How old are you?" 11, sir," Ethan answered. 11 years old, Alexander repeated, savoring the words. A smile began forming on his face. "Perfect. Then I won't feel bad when I win." He sat on the bench across from Ethan without waiting for invitation, moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to the world accommodating him, not the other way around. "Let's play," he ordered, more than proposed. "But this board is unacceptable. Catherine, bring mine from the car." "That's not necessary, sir," Ethan said quickly. "This board works perfectly fine. I wasn't asking your opinion, kid." Alexander's response had that casual cruelty that showed years of practice at making people feel small. "If we're going to play, we'll use a proper board, not this craftsmanship." The word craftsmanship came out like an insult. Ethan felt the blow as if it were physical. Grandpa had spent weeks carving that board, painting each square carefully, creating something with love because they didn't have money to buy a real one. Catherine returned from the car carrying a polished wooden board with marble pieces. It was beautiful, professional, probably cost more than everything Ethan's family owned combined. She placed it in the space between the two players. The contrast was brutal. The elegant board on top of the dirty cardboard Ethan used as a base. The marble pieces next to the homemade board now relegated to the side like trash. Much better. Alexander arranged the pieces with precise movements, showing experience. Now before we start, let's make this interesting. Do you have anything to bet, kid? Ethan looked at Mrs. Washington confused. He's got nothing to bet, mister. Hartwell, the old woman intervened. He's just a child. Then there's no game. Alexander started to stand. I don't play without stakes. Not worth my time. Wait, Ethan spoke before thinking. What do you want to bet? Alexander studied him like a predator, evaluating prey. Then his phone buzzed. A text from Master Crawford. Make it worth your while. If he beats you, pay him what that property's worth to you. Alexander smiled cruelly. The kid would never win. This would be entertaining. Tell you what, kid. Since you're so confident, let's make this real. He leaned back, arms crossed. If I win, you admit in front of everyone here that you're not as good as you think. That barefoot kids from the Bronx don't belong in the same world as people like me. The words hit Ethan like a slap. Several people in the growing crowd gasped. And if I win? Ethan's voice trembled. Alexander laughed loudly. If you win? If by some impossible miracle you beat me? He paused for effect. I'll give you $100 million. The park went silent. Someone dropped their coffee cup. It shattered on the pavement, but nobody noticed. What? Ethan whispered. You heard me. 100 million. Cash. Alexander pulled out his phone. Catherine, prepare a contract, witnessed and recorded. When I beat this kid, I want it documented. Sir, are you certain? Catherine began. Do it, Alexander snapped. Mrs. Washington grabbed Ethan's shoulder. Baby, you don't have to. I accept, Ethan said clearly. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. $100 million. His mom would never have to clean another toilet. His dad could get the surgery he needed. They could have a real home. Catherine typed rapidly on her tablet, then showed it to both players. This constitutes an agreement witnessed by... She looked around at the crowd, which had grown to about 40 people, all with phones out recording. Approximately 40 witnesses and documented on video. Mr. Alexander Hartwell agrees to pay Ethan Brooks $100 million if Ethan wins this chess match. Sign here. Both signed on the tablet screen. The crowd murmured with excitement and disbelief. This was insane. This was impossible. This was about to go viral. Your move, kid, Alexander said with a smirk. Let's get this over with. Ethan moved his pawn. E4. The king's pawn opening. Grandpa's favorite. Alexander responded instantly. E5. Classical. The game began. For the first 10 moves, Alexander played with casual confidence, barely thinking. He was good. Ethan could tell immediately. Better than most opponents he faced in the park. The man had training, experience. Probably played in corporate tournaments. But by move 15, something changed. Alexander's smirk faded. He was thinking longer between moves. His fingers drummed on the bench. Ethan was playing moves he'd never seen before, combinations that seemed to come from nowhere. The crowd had gone completely silent, watching the board like it was a religious ceremony. Move 20. Ethan sacrificed his bishop. Mistake, Alexander muttered, taking the piece. But his hand trembled slightly. Move 21. Ethan's knight jumped. That weird L-shaped move that Grandpa had taught him to love. The move that could jump over obstacles. Move 22. Ethan's queen slid into position. Alexander stared at the board. His face went pale. He saw it now. The trap. The beautiful, impossible trap that had been building for 12 moves. No matter what he did, he was finished in 3 moves. 4 at most. This isn't... Alexander's voice cracked. You can't. Check, Ethan said softly. Alexander's king moved. The only legal move available. Check, Ethan repeated. His rook this time. Alexander's king moved again. Boxed in. Nowhere to run. Checkmate, Ethan whispered. The park exploded. People were screaming, crying, jumping. Mrs. Washington had both hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Strangers were hugging each other. Phones were recording everything. Ethan sat frozen, staring at the board. He'd won. He'd actually won. Against one of the richest men in New York, for $100 million. Alexander stared at the board like it had betrayed him. His face cycled through shock, disbelief, then something ugly, rage. "Mr. Hartwell," Catherine said quietly. "The contract—" "Shut up!" Alexander snapped. He stood abruptly, knocking the marble board. Pieces scattered across the bench. "This is ridiculous. I'm not paying $100 million to a street kid based on a game in a park." The crowd's celebration died instantly. "But you signed," Ethan said, his voice small. "Everyone saw. It's on video." "You think I care about videos?" Alexander's voice was ice cold now. "You think any judge will enforce a verbal contract with a child? You're 11 years old. You can't even sign a legal document." "But you said—" Ethan felt the world tilting. "I said a lot of things. Doesn't mean I have to pay." Alexander straightened his tie. "Catherine, we're leaving, and if anyone posts those videos online, my lawyers will bury them in lawsuits." "You can't do this, Mrs. Washington stepped forward, her voice shaking with fury. "You made a promise in front of all these people." "Watch me," Alexander said flatly. He looked at Ethan with cold contempt. "Let this be a lesson, kid. The world isn't fair. People like me make promises to people like you and break them because we can. That's how power works." He turned to walk away. "My grandfather was right about people like you," Ethan said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Tears were streaming down his face now, but his voice was steady. He said some people get so rich they forget they're human, that they stop seeing other people as real. I didn't believe him. I thought if I was good enough, if I worked hard enough, people would keep their word. Alexander stopped walking but didn't turn around. "You're not just breaking a promise," Ethan continued. "You're telling every kid like me that we don't matter, that our talent doesn't matter, that we can do everything right and still lose because people like you decide we're not worth keeping promises to." The crowd was silent. Every word was being recorded by 40 phones. Alexander turned slowly. "You're right. I am telling you that. Because it's the truth. Welcome to the real world, kid." He walked to his Mercedes without looking back. Catherine hesitated, looking at Ethan with something that might have been shame, then followed her boss. The car drove away, leaving Ethan standing in the park, surrounded by people who'd witnessed everything, holding a broken chess set and a broken promise. Mrs. Washington pulled him into a hug. "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." But Ethan couldn't cry anymore. He felt numb, empty. He'd done everything right, played perfectly, won fairly. And it hadn't mattered, because Alexander Hartwell had been right about one thing. The world wasn't fair. Someone in the crowd spoke up. "I got the whole thing on video, every second. That man can't hide from this." "Me too," said another voice. "I'm posting this right now," someone else said. "The whole city needs to see what he did." Within minutes, the videos were uploading, spreading, going viral. But Ethan didn't know that yet. All he knew was that he'd won the game and lost everything anyway. He picked up his grandfather's broken knight from where it had fallen and held it tight against his chest. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," he whispered. "I tried. I really tried." Mrs. Washington looked at the crowd, at the phones still recording, at the anger on people's faces. She didn't know it yet, but the war had just begun. Alexander Hartwell thought he could walk away from this. He was about to learn he was very, very wrong. The video hit 1 million views in 3 hours. Sarah Brooks was on her knees scrubbing the bathroom floor of a Wall Street law firm when her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. She ignored it at first. Her boss had made it clear that personal calls during work hours meant termination. But the buzzing continued. 10 messages, 20, 50. Finally, during her mandated 5-minute break, she checked. The first message was from a number she didn't recognize. "Is this Ethan Brooks' mother? You need to see this." Attached was a video link. Sarah's hands were shaking as she pressed play. The bucket of dirty mop water beside her forgotten. There was her son, her beautiful, brilliant boy, sitting at a chessboard in Washington Square Park, his bare feet dusty, his patched jeans torn at the knee. And across from him sat Alexander Hartwell, a man whose face she'd seen on the sides of buildings, in newspapers, on billboards advertising luxury developments she'd never be able to afford. She watched her 11-year-old son beat one of the richest men in New York. She watched the crowd erupt in celebration. She watched Alexander Hartwell refuse to pay. The phone slipped from Sarah's wet hands and clattered on the tile floor. She didn't notice. She could only hear one thing, her son's voice, breaking as he said, "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I tried." "Mrs. Brooks?" Her supervisor's sharp voice cut through the fog. "Your break ended 2 minutes ago. Get back to—" "I have to go," Sarah said, already pulling off her rubber gloves. "If you leave now, you're fired." Sarah looked at the woman who'd never learned her first name in 3 years of employment, the woman who'd made her work through a fever last month because cleaning doesn't require being healthy. "Then I'm fired." She ran. Across town, David Brooks was selling newspapers at a subway entrance, his back screaming with every bend. The surgery he needed cost more than the family could save in 5 years. So he stood there, 12 hours a day, calling out headlines to people who walked past like he was invisible. His phone rang. "Sarah." "David, where are you?" Her voice was frantic, breathless. 42nd Street Station." "What's wrong? Is Ethan—" "He's fine. David, you need to see this. Our son just beat Alexander Hartwell at chess for $100 million and Hartwell won't pay." David thought he'd misheard. "What?" "I'm sending you the video. Watch it. Then meet me at the park. Now." The video loaded on David's cracked phone screen. He watched it once, twice, 3 times. By the 3rd viewing, there were tears running down his face. His son, his brilliant, beautiful son, had done the impossible, and the world had broken its promise anyway. A businessman walking past stopped. "Hey, you're that kid's dad, aren't you? From the video?" David looked up, startled. "That's messed up what Hartwell did," the man continued. "I shared it with everyone I know. That guy's gonna pay for breaking his word." Before David could respond, the man walked away. But others were stopping now, pointing, whispering. Someone had recognized him. The video was everywhere. In the park, Ethan sat on the bench where he'd played thousands of games. Mrs. Washington had convinced him not to leave. "Baby, you stay right here. This isn't over." But Ethan felt hollowed out, numb. People kept approaching, strangers, some crying, some angry. All of them had seen the video. "You were robbed, kid. My daughter's your age. What he did to you made me sick. I'm a lawyer, pro bono. You call me." Business cards piled up on the bench beside him, offers of help from people whose faces he'd never seen before this afternoon. Then the news vans arrived, 3 of them, local stations, then a national network. A reporter approached, microphone extended, cameraman in tow. "Ethan Brooks? I'm Jennifer Chen from News 4. Can I ask you a few questions?" Ethan looked at Mrs. Washington, who nodded. "How do you feel right now?" Jennifer asked, her voice gentle. "Confused," Ethan said honestly. "I won fair. Everyone saw. I don't understand why winning doesn't matter. What would you say to Mr. Hartwell if he was here?" Ethan thought carefully. Grandpa had always said anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. "I'd ask him if his word means anything," Ethan said quietly. "Because my grandpa taught me that a person is only as good as their promises. And if promises don't mean anything when you're rich, then what's the point of being rich?" The question hung in the air. Simple, devastating, unanswerable. Jennifer's eyes were wet. She wasn't the only one. The cameraman was wiping his face. The interview went live. Within minutes, it was being shared across every platform. Sarah arrived at the park running, still wearing her cleaning uniform. She pushed through the crowd and grabbed Ethan, pulling him into a fierce hug. "Baby, are you okay? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Mom. Ethan's voice broke. "I won. I really won. And he's still—" "I know, sweetheart. I know." Sarah held him tighter. And finally, Ethan let himself cry. Not the silent tears from before. Real, sobbing. The kind that came from somewhere deep. David arrived moments later, limping heavily. The run from the subway had aggravated his back, but he didn't care. He wrapped his arms around his wife and son. "I'm so proud of you," David whispered into Ethan's hair. So incredibly proud. But it didn't matter, Ethan sobbed. I did everything right and it didn't matter. It matters, David said firmly. You showed the whole city what you're made of, what our family is made of. That matters more than money. Does it? Ethan pulled back, looking at his father. Mom just lost her job coming here. Your back is getting worse every day. We still live in one room. What does it matter if I'm good at chess if nothing changes? The question broke David's heart because he didn't have an answer. But Mrs. Washington did. Baby, she said, kneeling in front of Ethan despite her protesting knees. Your grandpa used to say something I never understood until today. He said the most important victories are the ones that happen after you think you've lost. I don't understand. You will. She pointed to the cameras, to the crowd, to the phones all recording. Right now, millions of people are watching what happened to you. And they're angry, not just for you. For every time they've been cheated. Every time someone with power broke a promise to someone without it. She took his hands. You didn't just win a chess game today. You started something bigger. Something that scares people like Alexander Hartwell because they can't control it. As if on cue, someone in the crowd shouted, "It's trending! Justice for Ethan is trending nationwide." Another voice, "Hartwell's company stock dropped 4% in the last hour. His business partners are releasing statements distancing themselves." The information flowed through the crowd like electricity. The video had exploded beyond anything anyone expected. It wasn't just New York anymore. It was national, international. A well-dressed woman pushed through the crowd. "Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, I'm Patricia Morgan, attorney at Morgan & Associates. I've been following this situation, and I'd like to offer my services pro bono. What Mr. Hartwell did was legally actionable. We can't afford—" Sarah started. "Pro bono means free," Patricia interrupted gently. "I'm offering because what happened to your son is unconscionable, and because I have a daughter his age who deserves to live in a world where promises matter." Before Sarah could respond, another person stepped forward. "I'm Marcus Chen. I run a tech startup. I'd like to donate $20,000 to the Brooks family, today. No strings." "I'll match that," someone else called out. "Me too." Within 5 minutes, strangers had pledged over $200,000. Sarah couldn't breathe. This wasn't real. This couldn't be happening. But it was. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from someone named Vincent Crawford. The subject line read, "About your son's extraordinary talent." She opened it. "Mrs. Brooks, I am the one who arranged today's match. I've been watching Ethan play for 2 years. Your son is a genuine prodigy. I set up this situation knowing Alexander would likely break his promise. I needed the world to see both Ethan's talent and Hartwell's character. I apologize for the pain this caused, but I believe what happens next will change your family's life. We should meet." "Master Vincent Crawford, International Chess Federation." Sarah showed David the email. They both stared at it, trying to process. "He planned this," David whispered. "He set up Ethan to be humiliated?" "No," Mrs. Washington said, reading over their shoulders. "He set up Hartwell to be exposed." Big difference. Jennifer Chen was back, this time with a camera crew from a national network. "Mrs. Brooks, we'd like to do a longer interview. Your son's story is resonating with people across the country. Parents are showing the video to their children. Teachers are using it in classrooms. This is bigger than chess." Sarah looked at Ethan, who looked exhausted and overwhelmed. "Not today," she said firmly. "My son has been through enough. We need time to process this as a family." "Of course. But before you go," Jennifer handed Sarah a card. "When you're ready, please call. The world wants to hear Ethan's voice." As the sun set over Washington Square Park, the Brooks family sat together on the bench where everything had changed. The crowd had dispersed, but the cameras remained at a respectful distance. "What do we do now?" Ethan asked quietly. David pulled his son close. "We go home. We eat dinner. We figure out tomorrow when it comes. But what about Mr. Hartwell? What about the money?" Sarah smiled sadly. "Baby, I don't know if you'll ever see that $100 million. Rich men like him have ways of avoiding consequences. But you know what? We're going to be okay anyway." "How?" "Because the whole world saw what you can do. Because opportunities are coming that we never imagined. Because your talent isn't invisible anymore." She kissed his forehead. "And because sometimes the real victory isn't the prize you were promised. It's the doors that open when people finally see you. Ethan nodded, not entirely convinced, but too tired to argue. They walked home together through Manhattan streets where strangers now recognized them, through a city that had watched their son's heartbreak and decided it mattered. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know yet, was that at that exact moment, Alexander Hartwell was sitting in his penthouse, watching his world collapse on live television. His phone was exploding with angry calls from investors, partners, board members. His lawyers were telling him there was no legal way out. The video was airtight. The witnesses, too numerous. The public outrage, too intense. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Hartwell realized something terrifying. He'd won every battle in his life by having more money, more power, more connections than anyone else. But you can't buy your way out of being hated by everyone. The war Mrs. Washington predicted was just beginning, and Alexander Hartwell was about to learn what happened when the world decided you'd gone too far. Alexander Hartwell didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, watching the city lights blur through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His phone lay face down on the marble coffee table, silent now after hours of relentless calls he'd refused to answer. The bottle of scotch beside him was half empty. It hadn't helped, because every time he closed his eyes, he saw that kid's face. Ethan Brooks, 11 years old, barefoot, holding that broken chess piece like it was made of gold instead of wood, saying, "I'm sorry, Grandpa, I tried." Alexander poured another glass. His hands were shaking. His laptop was open on the couch, frozen on a news article. The headline made him sick. Billionaire breaks promise to struggling chess prodigy. The heartbreak heard round the world. Homeless. Alexander hadn't known that. In his mind, the kid was just poor. But homeless? He clicked to another tab. Twitter. The trending topics made him close his eyes. Justice for Ethan. Your Hartwell pays. Keep your word. Boycott. Hartwell 50 million tweets. In 12 hours. His company's official account had been bombarded with so many messages they'd had to disable comments. His personal Instagram, private, or so he'd thought, had somehow been found, and thousands of people were flooding it with photos of Ethan's face, the chessboard, screenshots of the contract Catherine had drawn up. "You should see what they're saying about you," Catherine's voice came from the doorway. She'd let herself in using the key he'd given her for emergencies. This qualified. "I don't want to know," Alexander said without turning. "Too bad." Catherine walked to the couch and sat down uninvited. "Your board of directors called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. 3 of your major investors have pulled out. The city council is reviewing every permit you have for ongoing construction projects, and—" She paused. "Your mother called." That made Alexander turn. "My mother? She's in Florida. Saw the video. She said, and I quote, 'Tell my son I didn't raise him to be a liar and a bully.'" Then she hung up. The words hit harder than any business loss. His mother, Elena Hartwell, who'd worked as a seamstress for 30 years to put him through school, who'd taught him that a handshake meant something, that your word was your bond. When had he forgotten that? "There's more," Catherine continued. "Master Crawford released a statement. He admitted he orchestrated the whole thing. Said he's been watching Ethan for 2 years, knew he was a prodigy, and set up the match specifically to expose you." "Expose me?" Alexander's voice was hollow. His exact words were, "Alexander Hartwell needed to be reminded that wealth without integrity is just expensive emptiness. I apologize to young Ethan for using him as the instrument of that lesson, but I don't apologize for the lesson itself." Alexander laughed bitterly. "So this was a setup from the beginning. Does that make you feel better?" Catherine asked. "That you were manipulated into showing the world who you really are?" "Who I really am," Alexander repeated. He looked at his reflection in the dark window. Designer suit even at midnight. Watch worth $60,000. Apartment worth $12 million. And somehow, the poorest kid in New York had more dignity than he did. "There's something else you should know," Catherine said quietly. "The video of Ethan's mother arriving at the park is going viral now too. She's still wearing her cleaning uniform. People found out she got fired for leaving work to check on her son. Great. So now I'm responsible for her unemployment too." "You're not responsible for that," Catherine corrected. "But you are responsible for breaking your promise to her son. And the internet has decided that makes you a villain." Alexander stood abruptly, walking to the window. Down below, Central Park was dark, except for the scattered streetlights. Somewhere in this city, that kid was probably sleeping on a mattress on the floor, in a single room he shared with his parents. And Alexander was standing in a penthouse that cost more per month than most people made in a year. "What do I do?" he asked. The question surprised him as much as Catherine. "You already know what you have to do. I can't just hand $100 million to an 11-year-old. "Why not?" Catherine challenged. "You were willing to risk it when you thought you'd win. That was different. I didn't think I'd actually lose. So you only keep promises when losing is impossible." Catherine stood, gathering her things. "I've worked for you for 8 years, Alexander. I've watched you build an empire. I've admired your business sense, your strategy, your vision. But tonight, I'm ashamed to work for you." The words stung more than they should have. "If you don't fix this," Catherine continued, "you're not the man I thought you were. And I can't work for someone I don't respect." She walked to the door, then paused. "By the way, the Brooks family received over $400,000 in donations tonight, from strangers. People who saw what happened and decided to do what you wouldn't, keep a promise to a child who deserved better." After Catherine left, Alexander sat in the dark for a long time. $400,000. From strangers. He'd spent more than that on his car. His phone buzzed. Against his better judgment, he looked. An email from his lawyer. "Alexander, we need to talk urgently. The agreement Catherine created puts you at serious legal risk. With multiple witnesses and video documentation, your position is extremely weak. If the Brooks family sues, and they now have pro bono representation, you're likely to lose, and the court costs, legal fees, and reputational damage could far exceed the $100 million. My advice? Settle immediately, show remorse, and rebuild trust, or prepare for catastrophic fallout." Alexander deleted the email. Then he pulled it back from trash and read it again. Lose everything. Was that even possible? He'd built this empire from nothing. Well, not nothing. His mother's sacrifices. His father's life insurance after he died from a construction accident. The same kind of accident that had probably ruined David Brooks's back. Alexander pulled out his phone and did something he hadn't done in years. He searched for his father's name. Roberto Hartwell, construction worker. Died age 38 when safety equipment failed on a midtown high-rise project. The company had settled with his widow for barely enough to cover funeral costs. Alexander had been 12, the same age as Ethan would be in a few months. He'd sworn then that he'd never be powerless like his father, never be the person who got crushed by the system. He'd become the system instead, but somewhere along the way, he'd become the person who crushed others. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "Mr. Hartwell?" A man's voice, older, cultured. "This is Master Vincent Crawford. I believe we need to talk." "You've got some nerve calling me," Alexander said. "You set me up." "I gave you an opportunity," Crawford corrected. "What you did with it was entirely your choice. I expected you to refuse the bet, actually. Walk away. But you made it bigger. $100 million. That was your ego, not mine. What do you want?" "To offer you something you don't deserve but desperately need. A chance at redemption." Alexander almost hung up. "I'm listening. Tomorrow at noon there's going to be a press conference. The Brooks family, their lawyers, several advocacy groups. They're going to announce their intention to sue you for the full $100 million plus damages." "I know. My lawyers already told me." "What your lawyers didn't tell you," Crawford continued, "is that if you show up at that press conference, publicly apologize, and announce you're honoring the contract, the lawsuit disappears. More importantly, you get the opportunity to explain why you initially refused." "Why would I want to explain that?" "Because right now the narrative is that you're a heartless billionaire who crushes poor children for sport. If you tell your story, your real story about your father, about how you built your empire, about how you lost your way, people might understand. They might even forgive." "I don't need forgiveness from strangers." "No," Crawford agreed, "but you need it from yourself. And you definitely need it from that boy." Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "Why do you care what happens to me?" "I don't, particularly," Crawford said honestly. "But I care what happens to Ethan. That child has a gift that comes along once in a generation. He could be a grandmaster by 15 if he has the right training, the right support. But right now, he's crushed. He won the game, but feels like he lost everything. He needs to see that doing the right thing matters. That integrity wins eventually. So I'm supposed to be his object lesson in redemption. You're supposed to be a man who keeps his word, Crawford said. Everything else is just details. After Crawford hung up, Alexander sat with the phone in his hand for a long time. Tomorrow at noon. He could show up, apologize, pay the money, become the story of the reformed billionaire who learned humility from a poor child. Or he could fight it in court, drag it out for years, maybe win on some technicality his lawyers would find. He pulled up the video again, the one that had been viewed 50 million times now. This time he didn't watch himself. He watched Ethan. The way the boy's hands trembled when he made his moves, the careful precision with which he handled the pieces, the moment of pure joy when he won. 3 seconds of happiness before Alexander crushed it with his refusal to pay. And then that speech, that devastating simple question. If promises don't mean anything when you're rich, then what's the point of being rich? Alexander had spent 20 years answering that question, with more money, bigger buildings, greater power. But sitting alone in his penthouse at 3 a.m, watching a video of himself destroying a child's dreams, he realized he'd been answering it wrong the whole time. His mother had been right. The internet had been right. Catherine had been right. He'd become exactly the kind of person he'd hated when he was 12 years old and powerless. Alexander opened his laptop and began typing an email to his assistant. Prepare a bank-certified check for $100 million, payable to Ethan Brooks. Have it ready by 11 tomorrow morning. Also, clear my schedule for the afternoon. I have a press conference to attend. He hit send before he could change his mind. Then he pulled out a piece of paper and began writing something he hadn't written in years, an apology that actually meant something. But even as he wrote, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered the question he couldn't answer. Was he doing this because it was right, or because he'd been caught? Did the reason even matter? Across the city, in a small room in the Bronx, Ethan lay awake on his mattress, listening to his parents whisper on the other side of the curtain. $400,000, his mother was saying. David, do you understand? Complete strangers gave us $400,000. I know. His father's voice was thick with emotion. People we'll never meet saw what happened and decided to help. We can move, get a real apartment. You can have your surgery. Ethan can go to a real school. A pause. Then David spoke again. But it's not the same, is it? It's not what he won. It's not what he was promised. No, Sarah agreed softly. It's not. Ethan closed his eyes, pretending to sleep, even though he'd heard every word. His mother was right. The money from strangers was kind. It was generous. It was more than they'd ever hoped for. But it wasn't the same as Alexander Hartwell keeping his word. Because Ethan hadn't beaten strangers at chess. He'd beaten one of the richest men in New York, and that man had looked him in the eye and said, "Promises don't matter when you have power." If that was true, then what was the point of being good, of working hard, of believing that talent and effort and integrity meant something? Ethan touched the broken knight he kept beside his pillow. Grandpa's voice echoed in his memory. The pawn becomes whatever it needs to become to win. But what did winning even mean if the other person could just change the rules? Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow, the press conference. Tomorrow, the world watching. Tomorrow, Alexander Hartwell would have to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. And Ethan Brooks would learn whether the world his grandfather believed in, the one where promises mattered and hard work was rewarded and doing the right thing meant something, whether that world actually existed, or if it had just been a beautiful lie to help a poor kid sleep at night. The press conference was scheduled for noon, but by 11:30, over 200 people had packed into the community center in the Bronx. News cameras lined the back wall. Reporters occupied every seat, and in the front row, looking small and overwhelmed, sat Ethan Brooks between his parents. He was wearing the only clean shirt he owned. His feet were still bare. The shoes donations had bought him felt wrong, like wearing someone else's skin. Mrs. Washington sat behind them, one hand resting protectively on Ethan's shoulder. "He's not coming," Sarah whispered to David. "It's almost noon and there's no sign of him." "Maybe that's for the best," David replied, though his voice carried disappointment. "We don't need his money. We have enough now to—" "It's not about the money," Ethan said quietly. Both parents looked at him. It's about whether promises mean anything. Before anyone could respond, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Alexander Hartwell had entered through the side door. He looked different. No designer suit today, just dark slacks and a white button-down shirt. No expensive watch. His hair wasn't perfectly styled. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, who'd spent the night wrestling with demons and wasn't sure he'd won. Catherine walked beside him, carrying a leather folder. The room fell absolutely silent as Alexander made his way to the front. Every camera focused on him. Every phone started recording. He stopped 3 feet from where Ethan sat. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The billionaire and the barefoot kid. The man who'd broken his word and the boy who'd believed promises mattered. "Ethan," Alexander said finally. His voice cracked slightly. "I owe you an apology." He knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with the boy. The cameras captured every second. "2 nights ago, I made you a promise. In front of witnesses, on camera, in writing. And when you won, when you beat me fairly, brilliantly, I broke that promise." Alexander paused, collecting himself. "I told myself it was because you were just a kid, that the bet wasn't legally binding, that I didn't really have to pay." The room was so quiet you could hear people breathing. "But the truth is simpler and uglier than that," Alexander continued. "I broke my promise because I could. Because I've spent 20 years believing that power means never having to face consequences. That wealth puts you above keeping your word to people who can't fight back." He pulled an envelope from his pocket. A simple white envelope that somehow looked heavy. "My father died when I was 12, Alexander said. "Construction accident. Safety equipment failure. The company paid my mother barely enough to bury him. I swore then I'd never be powerless like he was." His voice dropped. "But somewhere along the way, I became the person who makes other people powerless. I became exactly what I hated." Sarah's hand found David's. They were both crying silently. "Ethan, you asked me a question that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. You asked, if promises don't mean anything when you're rich, what's the point of being rich?" Alexander smiled sadly. "I didn't have an answer then. I'm not sure I have a good one now. But I know what the answer isn't. The point of wealth isn't to escape being human. It's not to stop having to keep your word." He opened the envelope and pulled out a certified check. $100 million. The number was so large it seemed unreal. People gasped. Cameras zoomed in. "This is yours," Alexander said, extending it toward Ethan. "You won it fair and square. But more than that," his voice broke completely now, "you taught me something I'd forgotten. That dignity has nothing to do with bank accounts. That an 11-year-old kid with broken chess pieces has more integrity than I've shown in a decade." Ethan stared at the check. His hands didn't move to take it. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why now? Because everyone's watching? Because you'll lose more if you don't pay?" The question was devastating in its honesty. Alexander closed his eyes briefly. "Honestly, both those things are true. Yes, I'm paying because the world is watching. Yes, I'm paying because my lawyers said I'd lose everything if I didn't." He opened his eyes, looking directly at Ethan. "But I'm also paying because last night, at 3 in the morning, I watched the video of our game 50 times, and I finally saw what everyone else saw. A brilliant kid who deserved better than what I gave him." He set the check on the table in front of Ethan. "I can't undo what I said. I can't take back walking away from you. All I can do is keep the promise I should have kept 2 days ago, and hope that maybe, someday, you'll believe that people can change." Ethan looked at his parents. Sarah nodded, tears streaming. David squeezed his son's hand. Slowly, Ethan reached out and took the check. The room erupted in applause. People were standing, cheering, crying, but Ethan barely heard it. He was looking at the number. $100 million. More money than he'd ever imagined existing in one place. "Mr. Hartwell," Ethan said, loud enough to cut through the noise. The room quieted instantly. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Will you teach me?" Alexander blinked. "Teach you what?" "Chess," Ethan said. "You're good. Really good. I won. But it was close. And Grandpa always said you learn more from opponents who push you." He paused. "I don't have a grandpa anymore. But maybe you need to remember why you love chess. before you used it to hurt people. The offer hung in the air like something precious and fragile. Alexander's eyes filled with tears. I would be honored. He extended his hand. Ethan shook it. And in that moment, with cameras recording and the world watching, something shifted. Not just for them, but for everyone witnessing it. Because they'd all seen the broken promise. They'd all felt the injustice. But now, they were seeing something rarer. A powerful person admitting they were wrong. A child offering forgiveness he didn't have to give. A second chance being earned, not demanded. There's one more thing, Alexander said, addressing the room now. The $400,000 that strangers donated to the Brooks family? I'm matching it. $800,000 total, going into a foundation for children like Ethan, kids with extraordinary talent who need support. He looked at Master Crawford, who'd been standing quietly in the corner. Master Crawford will run it. Catherine will manage it. And every dollar will go to making sure no other brilliant kid has to play chess in a park with broken pieces because the world didn't see them. Mrs. Washington stood up, applauding. Then everyone was standing again, but this time it felt different, not celebratory, sacred. As the press conference ended and people began filing out, Ethan stayed seated, staring at the check in his hands. Baby? Sarah knelt beside him. You okay? Mom, is this real? Did this actually happen? David joined them, wrapping both his wife and son in his arms. It's real, buddy. You did it. You won. We all won, Ethan corrected, looking around at the crowd that had supported them, the strangers who'd donated, Mrs. Washington who'd believed, Master Crawford who'd planned, and even Alexander Hartwell, who'd finally done the right thing. Later, as they left the community center, reporters shouting questions, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in the 2 days since the game. Hope. Not because of the money, though that would change everything, but because the world he'd stopped believing in, the one where promises mattered and doing right eventually won, that world had proven itself real, imperfect, delayed, requiring public pressure and viral videos and lawyers and strangers donating, but real. As they walked home through the Bronx streets, Ethan pulled the broken knight from his pocket, the one with the visible glue line. What are you going to do with the chess set now? Sarah asked. Ethan smiled. Keep it. The broken pieces are my favorite part. They remind me that things can break and still be valuable, that scars don't mean you're worthless. He looked back once at the community center, where Alexander was still talking to reporters, still apologizing, still trying to become someone better than who he'd been. Sometimes, Ethan said quietly, the pawn makes it to the other side of the board, and sometimes the king learns he's not as powerful as he thought. His parents exchanged glances over his head. Their son had won $100 million, but more importantly, he'd kept his soul. And in a world that often rewarded cruelty over kindness, that was worth more than any check could ever be. 3 weeks later, Ethan stood in Washington Square Park at the exact bench where everything had changed. But this time, he wasn't alone. Alexander Hartwell sat across from him, studying the same hand-carved board that he'd once dismissed as unacceptable craftsmanship. Now he handled the pieces with reverence, especially the knight with the visible glue line running through its neck. Your move, Ethan said softly. Alexander moved his bishop. It was a good move, better than 3 weeks ago. They'd been meeting every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. At first, cameras had followed them everywhere, news crews wanting to document the billionaire's redemption. But Alexander had refused all interviews. This isn't a photo op, he'd told them. This is a debt I'm paying. Eventually the cameras left. Now it was just 2 people playing chess, teacher and student, though neither was entirely sure who was teaching whom. Check, Ethan announced, his rook sliding into position. Alexander smiled. I walked right into that, didn't I? You were thinking 2 moves ahead. You need to think 5, like your grandfather taught you. Yeah, Ethan touched the broken knight, like Grandpa taught me. Mrs. Washington approached with 2 bottles of water. She'd officially retired from selling newspapers last week. The foundation Alexander created had hired her as its community outreach director. How's the game going? He's destroying me, Alexander admitted. Again. Good, Mrs. Washington said with satisfaction. Keeps you humble. Across the park, construction crews were building something new. A permanent chess pavilion, funded by Alexander's foundation. 20 marble tables with built-in boards. Free lessons every afternoon. Already 40 kids had enrolled. Sarah and David arrived, holding hands. David walked without limping now. The back surgery 2 weeks ago had been successful. Sarah was wearing professional clothes, studying for her GED. She'd decided she wanted to be a social worker, helping other families navigate the systems that had nearly crushed hers. "Ready to go, sweetheart?" Sarah called. "5 more minutes, Mom." She smiled. They'd heard that phrase a lot lately. 5 more minutes had become Ethan's favorite request. 5 more minutes playing chess, 5 more minutes at his new school, 5 more minutes doing homework in their new apartment with actual separate bedrooms. "Checkmate," Ethan said gently. Alexander studied the board, then laughed. "I never saw it coming." "You will eventually." Ethan started putting the pieces away carefully. "Grandpa used to say the best players see the whole board, not just their pieces. Your grandfather was a wise man." "He was." Ethan paused. "He would have liked you. The you you're becoming, I mean." The words hit Alexander harder than any checkmate ever could. As they stood to leave, a young girl approached shyly, maybe 9 years old, wearing shoes that didn't quite fit. "Excuse me, are you Ethan Brooks?" "Yeah," Ethan said, kneeling to her level, something he'd learned from watching Alexander's apology. "What's your name?" "Rosa. I saw you on TV. You beat a billionaire at chess even though you didn't have fancy pieces or anything." "I did. My teacher says I'm good at math, but we can't afford a tutor." Rosa's voice dropped to a whisper. "Does that mean I can't be good at it anyway?" Ethan felt his heart break and heal simultaneously. He pulled out one of the foundation's application cards that he now carried everywhere. "This is for kids exactly like you," he said, handing it to her. "Kids who are brilliant but need help. You fill this out, and we'll make sure you get a tutor. Promise." Rosa's eyes went wide. "Really? Really? And you know what? Being poor doesn't make you less smart. It just means the world hasn't seen you yet. But once they do," Ethan smiled. "Once they do, nothing can stop you." After Rosa ran off clutching the card, Alexander put his hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You're doing what I should have been doing for 20 years. You're doing it now," Ethan said simply. "That counts." They walked together through the park where a barefoot kid had once played with broken pieces, hoping someone would see him. Where a billionaire had learned that wealth without integrity was just expensive emptiness. Where a promise had been broken and then, against all odds, kept. The chess pavilion's sign was being installed. The George Brooks Memorial Chess Center. Mrs. Washington wiped her eyes. "He'd be so proud." "He's watching," Ethan said with certainty. "And he's smiling." As the sun set over Manhattan, Ethan picked up his grandfather's chess set, broken pieces and all, and headed home. Not to a single room where 3 people shared one mattress, but to an apartment with windows that opened, heat that worked, and a future that finally felt possible. The pawn had reached the other side of the board, and in transforming, had transformed everyone around him. Because sometimes the smallest pieces make the biggest difference. Sometimes keeping a promise changes the world. And sometimes, just sometimes, doing the right thing matters more than being right.